Well, I beat Mario Luigi Brothership, and it does not feel real. Hello everybody, I'm your ghost with the most, and your fabulous host Luke here, and thank you to my friend Jack for the redesign. I have talked about every Mario and Luigi game already, except for Brothership, because it wasn't out when I made my past video, so today I will be joined by my friend the Burning Baron again, so we can give our opinions on the game, and there will be spoilers in this video, so leave if you don't want that. I definitely have problems with Brothership. Enemy turns can go on for way too long. I swear to God, sometimes there was like a solid 2 minutes of enemies attacking me before I got to do anything. I hated the last area before the final boss. Whoever thought that pollen mechanic was a good idea can burn in hell. You don't have invincibility frames when you leave a battle, so you can just go right back into one, and it's pretty annoying. Luigi's AI is good for the most part, but sometimes it's really annoying. Like, if you're too far away from him, the game will force you to walk back to him. The first few hours of the game are way too slow. It takes far too long to get your first rose attacks, and even hammers. Luigi's battle menu being controlled with A instead of B sucks ass. There is also some annoying padding. Some of the islands get disconnected at some point and you have to go reconnect them, and most of it is just the same stuff you've already done with a bunch of forced enemy fights. You get the fire and ice flowers from doing it, but there's no reasons those couldn't have been just part of a new island. Most importantly, the game probably has the weakest final boss theme in the entire series. Bowser Jr.'s Journey had a banger final boss theme, but this game, the game people actually played, couldn't get one. Honestly, I found the final boss theme to be kind of annoying. Anyway, all of that aside, there is still plenty to enjoy. The battle system is good as always. There are plenty of interesting locations to explore. I actually really enjoyed the sailing sea theme, despite the fact that I hate boats and oceans. And the story is actually interesting. This is the best Mario story we've gotten in a long time. Bowser Jr.'s Journey had a great story, but nobody played that, except for me, apparently. I was actually invested in Brothership's story. The last few hours especially are insane. There are some fucked up stuff in the game too, and I love that shit. The fake reality was so cool. I do think it went on for a bit longer than it should have, but overall it was really cool. I do wish they played a bit more into the psychological horror though. Would have been awesome if they had all the previous villains from the series come back to torment the bros. Reclusa might be my favorite Mario villain. He might overthrow the Shroobs. I'm not entirely sure since recency bias is a thing, so I'll have to think more on it, but he was really good. Although, if he just didn't let the Mario Bros out of their fake reality world, or he just killed them while they were in that, or he put them in separate fake reality worlds, he would have won, but whatever. I do really like how it's stated that he has destroyed countless other dimensions the same way he's going to Concordia. That makes him feel so much more threatening. The story ain't perfect, there's definitely some tweaks that could have been made. Like the pig god tells the bros in Snatlet Cosette is Zocket, and for some reason they just don't tell Connie. You think that would create drama or something, but they just don't do anything with it. If they weren't going to do anything with the reveal, they should have just waited until after you beat Zocket to reveal it. Also, Cosette definitely should have died during the ending. It really felt like they wanted to kill her off, but weren't allowed to. The pig god also said Reclusa took advantage of an insecurity Cosette had to make her turn evil, but we never find out what that insecurity was, and it's never really expanded on, which feels like a big missed opportunity. The game's life lesson is really cute, like the whole connection thing, because they're plugs. They're so funny. And I do like it, it's cute, but at the same time, I do think there is some missed potential. Everyone seems a bit too eager to help, and I feel like it would have been cooler if the Uni Tree was destroyed because Concordia was starting to become disconnected and people stopped caring about each other, and we had to bring them back together, instead of Zocket just fucking everything up. The tutorials are pretty good, nothing on Dream Team's level, which is always good. Sometimes the characters can chat for a bit too long, but it's not usually too bad, and there's always button mashing. Art was weird. He barely did anything, and he just felt like a waste of a character. You can remove him and, like, nothing would change. His dad didn't really do anything either. I'm so grateful they didn't retcon the entire series for no reason. I love all the nods to previous games, and they even directly mention some games. They directly mention the events of Bowser Jr.'s Journey of all things, which is insane. I never thought they would reference that. Something that I do find weird, though, is that a lot of the traditional Mario stuff in the game is very generic. You're not getting any Elite Trio-type characters in this game. No unique Toad characters either. No Toadsworth or Toadbert or Toadico. Not even the captains from Bowser's Minions make an appearance, and they're literally just generic enemies with flags. Was the reason this game was able to have unique characters and different interesting locations because it takes place in a different dimension? I guess that's the skeptic in me. Also, the Extension Corps are literally just worse versions of the BFFs from Bowser Jr.'s Journey. Altogether, I would say Brothership is a good game with some annoying problems, but it has some absolutely standout moments that are worth seeing. In fact, I'm just going to ramble a bit now, and I'm just going to pretend that's not what I've been doing this whole time. The bait and switch with Reclusa's fake redemption at the end actually got me. If they for real did that, it probably would have ruined him as a character, and I got so annoyed for a second. I completely called Connie's teacher being Cosette, although I'm pretty sure everyone did. I didn't pick up on the name thing. I think it was very clever. The reason her name is Cosette is because she couldn't remember her name. Speaking of which, I am confused about a few things in the story, honestly. I got most of it, but I feel like some things aren't explained very well. I didn't do all of the side quests, so maybe more of it was explained there, but I don't know. I feel like I did most of the story important side quests. I just realized I didn't give any examples of story stuff I didn't think was explained well, or if I don't know if it was explained well because I didn't do all the side quests. So really quickly, I was just going to give a few examples. I don't know how Bowser Jr. escaped Zocket, and I also don't really like, why is Zocket a dude, but like Cosette's a girl? Because like Zocket doesn't remember anything. So is it like Zocket couldn't remember his own gender? Like, I feel weird talking about it, but like it's never explained. So like, am I stupid? Because I feel like Zocket isn't Cosette possessed by Reclusa. It's more like a corrupted Cosette, right? Am I getting this right? I'm just gonna move on. During the first few hours of the game, I thought Connie and Snatlet were going to be twist villains. I thought they were super suspicious, and then I remembered this was a Mario game and they would never do something that interesting. I was kind of right to be suspicious of Snoutlet. He wasn't evil, but there was something going on with him, so I'll give myself half credit for that. It was mainly the energy stuff you collected, or whatever the hell it was called. They tell you to collect it during the beginning of the game, even though there's no reason to be collecting it yet. And then when you ask them about it, they just say they'll think of something later. I thought that was super sketchy. I would have been completely fine if the Extension Corps just died after you fought them. They didn't do much after their fight, besides having a redemption arc in 2 minutes and making the worst jokes in the entire game. Also, I'm going to be completely honest, when I first saw Reclusa for a second, I thought he was a reborn Fawful and I freaked out. I'm glad they didn't drag Bowser into the final fight. I thought they were going to for a second, but I'm glad they didn't. This was also the first game in the series to not have a Wiggler boss fight. It still has a flying castle though, which means Partners in Time is the only game in the series to not have one of those. I thought it was a cool change of pace, how the final area wasn't a castle, instead being a giant evil tree. Technically, the giant tree, it has castle stuff in it, but whatever. I hated the final area, but it was a cool change of pace. I did genuinely think Fortress Zocket was going to be the final area, so the bait and switch did get me. I heard people complain about load times, and they were kind of annoying, I will admit, but I don't think they were too bad. I also heard people complain about slowdown and stuff, and while I did notice that, it was never too bad, and it was pretty infrequent. Never really affected me that much. I think Bowser was done very well in Brothership. I hate Bowser in Dream Team, and in Paper Jam he's just super uninteresting because it's Paper Jam. Brothership did a great job of having him be an antagonist while also knowing he's not the main threat. Also, they made the generic Magic Koopas orange. Fucking thank you. I've been asking for this for years. Make the generic Magic Koopas look different from Kamek, so then Kamek can have some form of a unique design to tell them apart. I can't believe it took them this long. One complaint I have with the game, although this isn't a Brothership exclusive problem, is that there are multiple times where I feel like you should be able to jump on things for like a shortcut, but there's an invisible wall, so the game won't let you. Like, there are ledges you could just jump down instead of taking the long way, but the game won't let you, and it's pretty annoying. The music in the game was alright. None of it was bad, but not too much of it was memorable, but there were definitely some standouts. Jellyfish Hall I liked. I also enjoyed the violin part of Twisted Island. My favorite song in the game is probably Fortress Zocket. Well, I think that's enough of my random thoughts on the game. I will now pass it over to Baron to give his thoughts.
Hey, what's up everyone? I'm the Burning Baron, but you can just call me the Baron. And once again, a big thanks to the Ghost of the Most for having me on board with this. I'm here to give my thoughts on Brothership as well, since we did cover the rest of the franchise. So I think I'm going to dive right in with the story, and I find that the story was really refreshing and fun. It really does feel like a true Mario and Luigi game in terms of pacing and its style. It's not like linear. It really does feel like you're constantly exploring different parts of the map. You got a whole bunch of different islands to explore and discover. It's really refreshing, and I greatly enjoyed every moment of the story. I will admit there were some parts of the story that felt a little padded, especially considering you had to basically destroy 2 barriers around the final area. That just felt a little unnecessary, and when Bowser invaded and unlinked some of your islands, that also felt like some pretty unnecessary repeating. Barring that, it was also a very long story. I did all the side quests with the story, regardless of whether or not I wanted to, and I think I almost clocked in at 60 hours for this game, and that's pretty long even by my standards. Did I find that bad? No, not really. In fact, I just felt like there were more times where I felt like I was being pushed to continue the story because it was just getting really good and interesting. I think they did handle a lot of the parts very well. Each sea kind of like... It felt like the first 2 seas were definitely openers. Well, maybe not openers, but like they all had their own themes. The first sea was more or less exploring the basics. The second sea focused more on Peach, Starlo, and the Idol crew. The third sea focused on a little story with Chillium and Bernadette, and the whole aspect that Gloam was being really introduced, and the fourth sea focused a lot on Bowser and his minions. And I think with each sea, it almost felt like their own individual little stories within the main story. And I really enjoyed that. When I think about it, it does kind of remind me a bit about some Paper Mario games where each individual chapter felt like its own little mini arc within the story. And it was really fun. It was all spaced out very nicely, and it always constantly reminded you of the main threat of the story. And I will admit, the story itself was a little discomforting for my taste at some points, especially with the whole Gloam aspect. But that's not exactly for this topic. This topic is all about how amazing the story overall was, and I very much did enjoy it. The plot twist was pretty interesting, and I don't know if I really want to spoil too much right now. You know, I haven't even really asked if we were doing a spoiler thing. Oh well. I really did enjoy a large bulk of everything. It was a great story. Unsettling at times, sure, but overall a very good story. I think aside from the padding, my biggest complaint was how they handled the side quests. The side quests are, at first, they seem like they are pretty free range and you don't really have to worry about them in the time you get them, save for a few story-related side quests that will let you know that there is a certain point where you won't be able to complete them anymore and they will probably just disappear off your side quest list. My biggest problem is that every single side quest will reach that point, regardless of whether or not they're even relevant to the story. And that's what my biggest problem is. I think you defeat the purpose of a side quest if you give all of them an expiry date. The story-related ones make sense when you're kind of given a chance to get some backstory about some of the main characters. That makes sense in the fact that when you progress the story a little too much, you might lose those opportunities to learn about the characters. But for something like beating up some random enemies, like the Shark Bone side quest, that's hardly worth an expiry date. I really just did not care about that. It was pretty... I think it was a pretty not okay choice. But overall, yeah, I did do all the side quests, and I guess going forward, this just gives me an idea of which ones I will and will not do in the future, because at the same time, some of those side quests probably weren't even worth the effort to begin with. I think a big meat of this talk from my end will definitely come from the characters. Every single character was fleshed out pretty damn well. Mario and Luigi themselves, I'd say rivaled Dream Team with how their brotherly connection was really fleshed out. I mean, the game is called Brothership, after all. I think it's meant to really pronounce Mario and Luigi's bond as brothers. And I think it was done very well through not just like the bro moves or even just the story, with their animations, with how everything just kind of felt like every character just had that faith in Mario and Luigi's bond. And I thought that was amazing. Snoutlet 100% is rivaling Dreambert as the best companion in the series. Might be a hot take, but I don't hate Starlo. Is she my least favorite of the companions? That's still a possibility, but I don't hate Starlo. She's a bit of a dick to Luigi, sure, and she's definitely sucking up to Mario a little too much, but Snoutlet felt like a breath of fresh air. Like, he respected both Mario and Luigi evenly, and he even rode around in Luigi's overalls or Luigi's hat as opposed to Starlo and Stuffwell and Dreambert. All of them rode around with Mario. But Snoutlet chose Luigi, and I really respect that. I think that was amazing. On top of that, Snoutlet was just so much fun. He was quirky. He was definitely not a pig, I guess. His whole entire shtick was that he was not a pig, but he continuously made pig jokes. So, buddy, you might want to reconsider how you get that point across. But overall, Snoutlet was just such a great NPC companion character. He was respectful. He almost kind of reminds me of Huey in that respect, but maybe just a little bit more lively. And he also had he had two characters to bounce off of as opposed to just one. The Concordians as a whole, as the group of NPCs, were overall pretty cool. Every single Concordian has the face of an outlet, which is kind of funny. And it just all merges in very well with the connecting theme of the game. And I feel like that's really clever when I think about it. Everyone's kind of got that. They're based around different outlets, different connecting cords, like USB cables, like those standard AV cables, stuff like that. It's really clever when I think about it. And I do generally enjoy all of them. Connie was a pretty enjoyable character. She seemed pretty basic, but she was definitely a lot of fun. Characters like Technicky were fun as well. She kind of struck me as an introverted character who was definitely still trying to learn the art of having a bond with somebody and making friends, but I kind of expect that out of the typical genius archetype. The Idol Squad was incredibly lovable. I know that the Nintendo was almost promoting them as a group that tried their best to help but weren't always successful. Bro, I have to disagree. They were way successful on their attempts to help. They got on a rocket and took themselves after a wall. They took on a wall with a rocket without any regrets. You'd think they would have been dead after that. They definitely grew as characters as the game went on. Especially Irene, and I think that was intentional because she was seen as the leader of them. And they were great. They were great supporting characters, and I loved them. On the other hand, there was a supporting character who I feel got completely ripped off in this game, and that was Ark. One of the very first characters you're introduced to barely has anything to do with the story the moment the Idol crew jumps in. Ark had potential, and I feel like he was ripped off. Bit of a spoiler, but it should be noted that he didn't even get his reunion with his father until the credits, where it was glossed over in a small cutscene with no dialogue. I think the biggest shocker was at the end of the game, again, spoilers, when Reclusa unleashed all those fantasy flowers, and Ark was one of the first ones to get trapped by it. Like, aside from those flowers just trapping a bunch of key characters, another one being Technicky, which was kind of a shocker, they trapped Ark first, and that's just crazy. I thought this guy was supposed to be something for this game, but he really wasn't. And that's not even getting to the fact that his father even left notes at every single lighthouse, and there wasn't even any sort of reconciliation with him. Like, we didn't find him or anything. He didn't get to talk to us. We didn't get to see him. He just appeared at the end as a glossed over cutscene. Poor Ark, honestly. Beyond that, though, I think the other big thing about the characters were the mainstays in Peach, Starlo, and Bowser and his minions. They were all handled very well for what it's worth. For starters, there's Peach. You know, the character who's usually relegated to damsel in distress. She wasn't. In fact, you could argue that she probably played a bigger role in this story than she has in any other game. And while I chose not to make her a main part of the game, in the fact that one scene you can choose between her or Luigi to get kidnapped so that we can find our way through Lot of Coins Island and figure out what Zocket's team is up to. Now, I chose Luigi simply because I've been rescuing Princess Peach for at least 25 years. And I'm going to be 100% honest, my brain's just hardwired not to trust that lady getting kidnapped by anybody. I did indeed send Luigi in there to get kidnapped, and it worked out alright. But the fact that Peach even has that option and it doesn't lead to her getting kidnapped for the entire game is pretty impressive. Peach was actually a pretty standalone character. She wasn't exactly huge or integral to the plot, but she wasn't a waste of time, that's for certain. She definitely tried to help in several situations, and it paid off. And I'm impressed. The same can be said about Starlo, who has been relegated to an NPC role after being the companion for at least 3 games straight, barring remakes. And she overall wasn't even all that unlikable either. She wasn't an actual dick to Luigi, maybe once when she just bluntly called him Mario's brother, you know, despite knowing his name for 3 straight adventures. And she even got a fun little bit with Bowser, which was a huge callback to Bowser's Inside Story. I generally loved that little side quest. There's Bowser, who had his own large part in the game and kind of was... his role in the game was kind of comparable to Partners in Time, where he got a focus, but he wasn't the main focus. And I think that's the best part. Because unlike games like Dream Team, where Bowser completely stole the spotlight from a relatively deserving antagonist, Bowser didn't actually steal the spotlight, and the main antagonist remained the main antagonist. Bowser showed up in clutch for a scene at the end, but otherwise his entire role was kept to the 4th C of the game, and it was pretty respectable. You still fight him twice, and he still has this rivalry with Mario and Luigi, and that he still antagonizes them, but he doesn't take over the entire game, and I think that's the most respectable part. That's why I think all these mainstays were handled very well. And additionally, there was Bowser Jr. And I think the reason why I want to bring him up is that one of the most impressive parts of this game is how they connected Bowser Jr.'s character to the side story of the Bowser's Inside Story remake, Bowser Jr.'s Journey. Kamek directly references the events of that game by reminding Bowser Jr. about loyalty and friendship, something that Bowser Jr. definitely keeps a hold on in his relationships with Buddy. And I found that to be amazing. Like, guys, Bowser Jr. has a friend. He's got a friend, guys, but he doesn't want you to know that. But we all know that. And I think it's just so impressive for him to retain that character development, especially in a franchise that doesn't exactly encourage character development on a large scale. So seeing it happen to Bowser Jr. was fantastic, and it was also an amazing nod to Bowser Jr.'s journey. Something I'm sure Ghost with the Most has already talked about being a very amazing callback for a side mode that probably not a lot of people even played. So, good on you, Nintendo. The enemies in Brothership were all around pretty diverse, and I think that's one of the best parts. See, since the last original game was Paper Jam, and it opted to reuse other enemies that were less than creative, Brothership once again returns to the idea of creating brand new enemy designs and bringing back a few extra enemies from older titles to make up the overall enemy roster. Of course, you still have some Mario staples, like Bowser's minions for the most part, but outside of them, the game largely relies on a brand new cast of enemy designs, and I think that's amazing. The one thing I could say about them is that while the diversity is great, the quantity feels a little less in comparison to other games. You start to see the extent of the enemy designs pretty fast, and that usually would go up about to the point of the 3rd C, where you start finding Gloam versions of enemies. The overall enemy system seems to follow a similar path to Dream Team, where you have your basic enemies, and then you have the powered up version of enemies, which are noted with an R at the end of their name. Then you get the Gloam enemies, and then you reach a point where you're fighting R versions of Gloam enemies, so it's pretty interesting. Overall, though, I do very much enjoy the enemies. They're a little tough to dodge at first, but that's probably because you're just getting used to brand new enemy attacks. But one thing I did find really funny, and it kind of ties in with Zocket and his army, is that Zocket is generally geared towards solitude, and the irony is that his troops work really well as a team. Almost every Zocket-related enemy works in a group, whether they be the helmeted Zoc troopers who always attack in large numbers, to the troopers who all have unique attacks with one another. I find that really, really funny, especially considering Zocket himself is gearing towards solitude to the point where he can't even remember the names of his own team. So I just find that notably funny. Moving on from the enemies to the big bads, we have the bosses. And in general, they were phenomenal. There might be one boss that's less than great, and that would be the Mega Snapdoor. And that's mostly because it's just a bigger version of a normal enemy. But even then, all the bosses are made much more entertaining with the Luigi logic idea. Almost every boss battle has Luigi using the gears in his brain to come up with some wacky way of stunning the boss, and it's generally really funny. From swinging Gobblelick around by the tongue, dropping boxes on Sharp Cask, shifting the environment's temperature to counter Pipe Gunk's current state, and I think what has to be the best one, hijacking an airship to fight Gloam Bowser. Overall, Luigi's crazy ideas are really entertaining, and they work really well with the bosses. They offer up the chance to do some serious damage, but I don't think they make or break the battle in general, because everything outside of using Luigi logic is still pretty challenging, and I very much appreciate that. Beyond that, we have Zocket and the Extension Corps. The Extension Corps are characters I definitely want to talk about, because aside from them having a really fun battle that actually doesn't have Luigi logic in it, I also just like the group as a group of characters, and that's something I forgot to mention during my talk about the characters themselves. The Extension Corps are really fun, and I think what makes them even better for me is that I'm a relatively big sucker for the redeemed villains idea. And while these three can be seen as maybe a lesser version of the Elite Trio or the Best Fitness Friend, I personally just really enjoy them. Maybe not nearly as much as the Elite Trio. They are a bit of a iconic trio for the series. But I might like them just a little bit better than the Best Fitness Friends, because I personally just feel like they kind of mesh together a little better. They clash at times, but at the end of the day, especially at the very end, they prove that they really do care for each other as they share a bond. Zocket, on the other hand, feels like a really good villain overall. He is driven by a need to inflict solitude on everybody, and that kind of leads to the big spoiler point of the story, in that Zocket is actually just Connie's mentor, who had been brainwashed by the power of Gloam into reviving the final boss. More on that character later. Brainwashing is not exactly the greatest of concepts for me, but overall, Zocket was a pretty menacing villain, and definitely had a really good design to him, even if he was just a facade created by the main antagonist. Overall, Zocket's fight was pretty challenging, and I have to get a credit for that. Moving on from the bosses, we have to talk about the final boss. It's a bit of a mixed bag. Reclusa himself was a fairly entertaining villain, and had a stage presence and character almost on par with the likes of Fawful or Diminio. Every moment this character was on screen, it was relatively hilarious, and I think even more ironic than Zocket and his army was the fact that the main antagonist, the main final boss, who was working towards breaking bonds and companionship entirely, had some of the most entertaining stage presence. Like, again, for someone who wants to rule the world through solitude, he sure makes a really big first impression on everybody when he's talking to them. It's kind of funny, and I really like that, because it just gives him so much character. I really like Reclusa's puns when he introduces himself as the one and lonely, and proceeds to say, "Let's get this party finished." I really like those gags that he pulled off. And it's a good thing he has a good stage presence, because it really makes up for the final boss, which was pretty underwhelming in return. I will admit that the tree phase of the final boss was pretty fun, if not really challenging as well, but the fight against the Weeping Core and Reclusa himself were ridiculously easy, all things considered. Yeah, I was still taking hits from him, and I still found myself healing frequently, but I don't think Mario or Luigi went down once when fighting him. He has to have been one of the easiest final bosses. I remember that Cacletta was hard, especially in the original Superstar Saga, where you're left to fight her soul with 1 HP at the very beginning of the phase. I remember the Elder Princess Shrew being relatively difficult. Both Dreamy Bowser and even Shiny Robo Bowser were significantly harder than this. Dreamy Bowser especially, considering I see him as the hardest final boss. And even to what I believe the next easiest boss was, which Dark Bowser in the Dark Star Core, I remember still losing to that fight a few times when I first played it. This one, I fought Reclusa once and I didn't die to him once, which is a lot more than I can say about every single other final boss. And on top of that, pretty weak final boss battle theme as well. Like, everything else was better than this. Like, the final boss theme from Paper Jam was great. Cacletta's final battle theme was great. The iconic In the Final was great. And that's not even talking about how I think Adventure's End is the best song in the entire franchise. This one, heavily disappointing. I think I'll finish this off by just mentioning a few other things this game had to offer. I kind of noted on this with the boss battles and the final boss, but the game's difficulty overall was pretty challenging. I only got a game over twice, and once was because I was testing the grounds with the shark bones. The other was against Zocket himself. And I will admit, like I said, his fight was pretty challenging. Even then, though, I did still find myself reviving the brothers frequently with a lot of healing in between against even the more basic of enemies. I think that it's pretty impressive that the game does have a bit of a higher difficulty level, and I think a lot of that is also thanks in part to the fact that pretty much every enemy has much higher stats, and you might see the final ranking of your level ups with it by the end of the game, which is kind of different for the series standards. The enemies were also pretty tough to dodge, which adds to the challenge, and that probably could just be because I was learning new attack patterns. But even after I had gotten used to them, they were still pretty challenging. I think notable examples include Bob-ombs and Dry Bones. A few mute points that I can also cover are the initial opening to the game and Luigi's behavior. The opening was a bit slow, I will admit. Well, Dream Team had a slow opener. At least Brothership decided not to shove all the tutorials into your face and shove them into the backlog where they belong. Otherwise, Luigi was also kind of NPC-like most of the time. And while I do kind of forgive this because he's still a very active part in the game, in the battle theme, or in the battles, and I think that's what's the most important. And plus, there were still a few puzzles where you did have to control Luigi entirely to help Mario, but then there were other times where it just felt like he was moving along, doing what needed to be done to get Mario across to another area. One more thing I would like to mention is the soundtrack. It was pretty impressive across the board. I don't think there were nearly as many standouts when compared to Bowser's Inside Story, Partners in Time, or Dream Team, but the overall themes were pretty good. I think my favorites were the major boss battle theme and the boss battle theme for the Extension Corps, as well as a few island themes like the Conductor Island. A lot of coins building. I really did enjoy those. Otherwise, it was a pretty solid soundtrack, just maybe not the best the series had to offer. And I think that'll wrap it up for all my thoughts. Once again, thanks to the Goats for having me on board, and I hope you guys all enjoyed the video.
Fuck, I just realized during this entire video, neither of us mentioned battle plugs or, like, our opinions on, like, how you can slightly change the story. I gotta think of something quick. They're cool. Yeah. Saved it. Also, like, wouldn't it have been funny if, like, after the idol kids, like, got launched at the rocket to destroy the wall, like, they just, like, died and they were never mentioned again for the rest of the game? That would have been hilarious, like, right? That's just not me. I just kind of found them annoying. That got them going to hell, aren't I? Well, those are all of our thoughts on Mario Luigi Brothership. Thank you so much to Baron for doing this video with me, and thanks again to my friend Jack for the redesign. Now, if you'll excuse me, I will go look up Rule 34 of Reclusa. That was a joke. Maybe.